As I walk around and carry it with me, and I'll mold it, and I'm playing it over in my mind. Might be doing it right now. Right. So that when I get to the place where I'm going to sit down and write, pretty much a final draft comes out. I do edit, and I work things over, but it's pretty much a finished product, and I have a hard time with the rhythm if I edit too much after I've put it on the page, because there's things like the story Possum Trot is very fast-paced, and Tim Fay of the Wampanoag Almanac said, he called me the Kerouac of the cornfields, because It's got this beat feel that just goes on through it, and that's, I think, partly because I put it out all in one sitting, and when I go back and I think, this doesn't work or that doesn't work, and I try to change it, I might make a better image, but there's a blip, there's like a scratch on the record then when I go back, and maybe you might not hear it, but I hear it. That's not right. The rhythm broke there when I... So
is it particularly frustrating for you if you can't just get it out?
Yeah, it's terrible, and I'm not. I've said to people, I don't necessarily say, you must really like to write. It's like, no, I don't like to write. I like to have written.
Right.
I like having a finished product that I created. But sometimes it's almost nauseous to sit. I mean, and physically, it's there. It's a feeling of almost like you're going to regurgitate. I can feel that it's coming, but I haven't got it on the page yet, and it's just that sickening feeling right before you let it out. So it's not entirely a pleasant process.
Yeah, I was thinking that, but when you were talking about doing the stuff in your head, I was thinking, you don't hear many writers actually say that, but I think a lot of, I've always worked the first sentence or the first paragraphs of stories in my brain. And then when I finally have, you get a feeling I expect that, okay, I've got it now. I've been working it, and it's got rhythm, like you said. And I think that's pretty cool, the way you put that together. It's almost like music coming out of you, and the keyboard or your piano keys or something.
Yeah. I think it's important to keep it feeling like improvisation. Right. If I think too much about it, it comes out stiff and too overly structured.
Right. And that's, when you do it that way, it has that pattern, and then if someone says you need to change it, and in your mind you're probably thinking, that means I have to change everything.
I got to start the whole thing. Yeah. As far as working in a bookstore goes, it was very helpful to me because I knew a lot of people, and so when the book came out, I had contacts that another author might not have had. I knew other booksellers. I knew people. I knew distributors. Like Ingram Book Company, I had contacts because I buy books from them. So then, I can phone up and say, I've got one of my own now. And, just meeting people at, reviewers, other writers that had been in for events that we'd hosted or I'd hosted in the past that I could call on, and people have been very helpful and very appreciative. So it's helped a lot. As I tour and do book readings, it's interesting because I tend to identify with the person that's hosting me. And, there's always the great fear that you have a reading and no one comes. And I've been to a few of those, and so I'm stuck not with just the uncomfortableness of thinking, gee, no one wanted to hear what I had to say. But then I also have been in the shoes of the bookseller that's sitting there thinking, oh my God, I asked this guy to come read and nobody showed up. So it's been an interesting combination of careers.
Right, because I always imagine the bookstore owners, I've never owned a bookstore, but I always imagine that they're in there, they love books, and that they must naturally love the idea of writing, and so I just have always fantasized that bookstore owners probably always did want to become writers, or that was their first passion, and then they just wanted to be as close to that as they could be, and I think it was probably like that.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that booksellers are book readers,
right?
And I don't think anyone reads books without thinking it wouldn't be great to be able to write one of your own. Everybody kind of has a book in the back of their mind that they just think of, if I could only get that out.
Right, and I will, from my point of view, working with Harley was definitely not your typical first author questions that came into me. And that's not to say that anybody's questions are good or bad, but this was more, I know he knew about distributors, he knew a lot more than I did about a lot of book selling, because that's what he does. And so I would just say, maybe we should contact Ingram, and I'd say, that'd be great if you can pull that off.
Well, we talked about little things too, that like the size of the book, that a lot of authors wouldn't think about, but I knew from being in the book business, the book people who buy books and put them on their shelves at home, they want them to match.
Exactly.
And they want their a row of books. And so you get an oversized book, and it looks awkward on their bookshelf. They're less likely to buy it. I mean, I have a friend who's a poet and a well-respected Iowa poet who put out a book that was oversized. It was like workbook size. It's like my first thought was, my God, nobody's going to buy that, and it doesn't matter how good the poetry is. It's not going to fit on the shelf. And so that was one of the little things. Like we talked about how big the book would be, and I wanted it to be the standard trade size. So
Right. So it's 5.5 by 8.5, which is right on the shelves. Talk about spines. It's all stuff that you wouldn't normally carry on a conversation with writers necessarily about that, because they're always looking to me saying, well, whatever's normal, and I apparently sometimes say no oversize is normal. But I have learned a lot from Harley about being a book publisher, in addition to having the privilege of doing his book. It's done really well.
Yeah, it's true that you can't judge a book by its cover, but you certainly sell a book by its cover. So
I can imagine.
Definitely.
Well, as a bookseller, you're also sort of on the front lines of sort of how people are learning about books, right? I mean, people used to come in having read something in the newspaper or maybe heard about it from a friend, or you as a bookseller would recommend something. Are you seeing new ways that people come in and say, like, I learned about this book and I would like to purchase a copy?
There's a lot more social networking stuff comes into play. People have seen it on Facebook, or they've been perusing an online bookseller's website and seen it. And the shortcoming of online booksellers is you can't look at the book usually. So they'll come in because they actually want to look at a copy of the book before they would commit to buying it. So we see a lot of that. We still see, we're a college town in Grinnell. And so there's still a lot of readers of the New York Times Book Review or those sorts of publications. And so we get a lot of people come in with a marked up Publishers Weekly or whatever, and they want this book or that they've clipped out. Or, they'll see it in the Iowan or the Register or the Gazette. And so they still do notice things from the print media and bring it in. It's still actually more prevalent than other forms.
Do you see the books that people are interested in changing based on the source that they hear about it from?
Not really. I think people are kind of tuned in to the area of their interest already. So even though it's a different medium, it's a media that still reflects their interest. So the same person that's going to be reading the New York Times Book Review is also online going to be looking at the New York Times Book Review or those kinds of publications. The person who saw it in Farm Journal or whatever is probably online looking at farming pages, and that's where they've seen it. So not a lot of change that way, no.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I know this kind of relates to your book, but I know, have you considered writing anything longer? Because I can tell I get a lot of feedback on your book, and it seems like we're ready for his next book, or we'd like to see you do a novel now.
I'm told you have to write a novel to be taken seriously. So it's going on in my head. I've got one in process. There's a little bit on the page. I started my family late in life, so I have an 8-year-old girl and a soon-to-be 11-year-old boy, which occupy a lot of time. Yeah. So I don't get a lot of time to actually work on it, and I have a day job, of course. But yeah, I've got a novel in the works. I know what it is. I know how it's going to proceed. I know its structure. I just have to fill in from point A to point D.
Yeah, no kidding.
So
the easy part.
Yeah. So your writing process, though, right? I mean, it seems very suited to the short story style, right? Like if I can barf this out, regurgitate this out. So here's the
is that a tie or is that a short story?
Right. You can do that in 24 hours. A novel, that's not going to happen. No. How is that process different for you, and what are the frustrations that you find there?
I think in small blocks. In my stories, even for short stories, most of them are very short. And so I've thought often about how am I going to ever organize and structure a novel that I can keep together in my head and get it done. And so what I'm working on is a novel that's somewhat of a collage, but and in very short chapters. And so the chapters will build one on the other like like a collage, and you might not go from this chapter to the ending of this chapter doesn't necessarily lead into the beginning of the next chapter, but it'll be very short, very fast paced, reminiscent maybe of like Vonnegut or Brautigan chapters. Very short, kind of poetic in their own right.
And you've got Steve, lined up to publish this.
Steve's lined up there. We'll see what happens.
Well, I had a question about bookstores in general.
Okay.
Because there was this thing in Iowa City a couple years ago, like the third best place. And so it was like, you've got your home and you've got your school, but where's that place where the community still is going to get together and meet? And maybe it's the library. But I always want it to be, like in Grinnell, for instance, I want it to be the Pioneer bookstore. And so a bookstore seems like it has to be more than a place that just sells books almost now.
Yeah.
Do you feel like to be a bookstore owner or to have a collection of authors that you have to turn it into more than a bookstore these days?
I think that's true. It has to be kind of a public space. It hasn't happened so well in Grinnell as it did in Cedar Falls, where my store, Brautigan Books, was people hung out there. We had readings frequently, and we had a Christmas party. People brought wine and cheese. We did a turkey. And it was a family that grew up around that place, and that's not happened yet in Grinnell. Partly, I think, because it's belongs to the college and wouldn't be there without the college. But anytime you have an institutional presence,
it dampens things a little bit.
Yeah, because you have less liberty to be spontaneous, which families and relationships require. So
I can't forget Brautigan Books because I love Richard Brautigan, and that was your symbol. I've never seen all the ads. Richard Brautigan there,
hitchhiking down the road with a manual typewriter tucked under his arm. So.
This is a little of a side, but I first met you from an art show we did in Cedar Falls.
Yep.
And on my quest to be a writer or an author, I was the first place that I ever did a reading was at Brautigan Books.
Yeah.
And so when I entered that store, I could tell that there was people there, and everything was ready to go. And I almost romanticize readings like that now because they don't often.
Yeah.
It's hard.
There was a group of people there. There was a core community, and you didn't have failures at readings because there were 20 or 30 people that were going to be there no matter what. And honestly, they might not have been there for the reader. It was a social event. It was a reason to get out. There was wine and cheese. Yeah. Everything was great. But the reader always felt welcome and greeted, and it was always a happy experience. I remember Richard Manning read there and had the time of his life, and he disappeared on the hill, College Hill, for a while, and I ran back into him, and he's like, his arms were up in the air. He said, "Oh my God!" He said, "I've found the pride. I've found the pride." He was happy.
Yeah, because now people do. Now that's the difference between social media and real social stuff.
Yeah.
Now you can have a lot of people comment on something you did on Facebook, but it's more rewarding when they show up as a social moment.
And my experience is that with the social media, as far as promoting an event, the people who say they're going to be there on Facebook are the ones who don't come.
Right. That's what I mean. It's so easy. Yeah, I'll be there. Because it's not as easy as hitting the return button.
Right.
There's advantages to social media, but that's one part that doesn't carry over when you think social media.
Well, for sure.
Right.
But we're glad that you showed up today. Okay. And thanks for joining us for the second edition of the Tall Corn Book Talk. I'm Nick Bergus with Steve Semken and J. Harvey McIlrath.
Yeah. Read early, read often, catch the bookworm.
Thanks so much for joining us.